I had a very severe problem with alcohol. And then when I saw that in them, when I was desperate to help one of my children, it ruptured our relationship because I was butting in, interfering, insisting, and I went so far as to do, I guess, the unthinkable, I went to the authorities.
And what was that experience like for you as a
It was
father?
devastating. It just ruptured our relationship.
In this special Father's Day episode of My Legacy, hosts Martin Luther King III, Andrea Waters King, Mark Kilberger, and Craig Kilberger are sharing some of the best lessons from their favorite dads. Martin Luther King III takes us inside the King home, sharing lessons Dr. King modeled as a dad. Shark Tank mogul Daymond John on the one question to ask your kids every night. CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta on raising teens in a digital world. And the best advice comedian and Emmy winner Larry Wilmore gave his kids. First up, beloved actor Martin Sheen on how to show up even when it hurts.
So Martin, you've raised 4 children. What do you hope your children and grandchildren remember most about you?
You have children as well, and you can't love one more than the other, but you love them all differently. And because of their needs. And my greatest hope is that they will love each other when we're gone, when Jan and I are gone, their mother, Jan and I. And for that, we have grandchildren and great-grandchildren now. But I see the love. I see the commitment they have to, a moral frame of reference. None of them are Catholic because I didn't raise my kids Catholic, But I see a sense of their humanity and their, best of all, a reflection of who they are is in their sense of humor and in their sense of humor with me. They take great pleasure, to get under my skin, with my ego, I can imagine you pouring the water in your dad's ear and then fleeing. Well, they poured a lot of stuff in my ear too, and I wasn't as nonviolent as your dad, but they rub you the wrong way, but your children, they are a reflection of the very best and the very worst part of us. I remember somebody was once asked, some famous person was asked what they would like to be remembered for, and he said, for about 5 minutes. And I think that's okay. And the old phrase, he that hath offspring giveth hostages to the future. Mm-hmm. We do. It's an act of faith. It's an act of hope.
What would you say is the most difficult time that you've had as a parent?
Dealing with my own addiction. I'm being vulnerable, and they seeing me vulnerable, and my image crumbled. And then when I saw that in them.
Mm. And what was that addiction to you, for those who don't know you as well? And how did you overcome?
My addiction?
Yes.
Yeah, alcohol. Yeah, I had a very severe problem with alcohol.
And how did you overcome that? I
overcome it because I think I mentioned about I came back to the Catholic faith, and I realized gradually, that this was a source of nourishment and grace that I could use to let it go, and I did. And then a friend of mine who was in the AA, the 12-step program, when I was desperate to help one of my children who had a severe problem, he said, you should get in the program. I said, but I'm sober. He said, doesn't matter. You've got to learn the skills.
And how did you use that to help your child?
I wasn't able to, because he had no formal teaching in the faith or any faith, but he had a very generous and a very vulnerable spirit. So I knew that he would not refuse me, but I had to take that step.
And I'm assuming this is Charlie?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was that experience like, bonding as you
Well,
went through
it
that
didn't
step?
start out as bonding. It ruptured our relationship because I was butting in, interfering, insisting that he act a certain way. But I think my persistence had a lot to do with it. I didn't let him off the hook. And I went so far as to do, I guess, the unthinkable, I went to the authorities and said, I know this guy, and he's abusing his probation.
And what was that experience like for you as
It
a
was
father?
devastating because it just ruptured our relationship.
Yeah. And where's your relationship now?
It's like I don't know anyone like him. I go to mass, every weekend, and so he'll call and say something about, well, we got to get. I said, well, I have to get to the. Oh, you're still into that, huh? Oh well, lots of luck with that, But he clowns about it, and yet I know that what he's really doing is he wants to see it in action. He wants to see it in me. I'm the only one.
Wow.
That he's going to find that in,
Wow.
on a regular basis. And the fact that I've kept it up for the last 40 years is means something to him. So I know what he's doing, He wants me to prove it. In some sense, you can't prove your faith, but you live it.
What do you love most about him?
His vulnerability. He was so vulnerable. And he was so... He was so aware of people's needs. I never saw him unkind to a person in need, whether it was a fan or somebody on the set or a homeless person. His compassion, he was an inspiration. I would just stand back and say, "Geez, that's my son. Look how extraordinary he is." I'm 84 years old now, and I'm often asked, do I think about death? And I respond, of course, I think about it every day. I think I've got a shorter future than I have a longer past. I get less frightened of it, although I'm not looking forward to it, but I have to include it in every breath, because these days we live in very, very precarious and peculiar times, to say the least. I love Richard Rohr's comment. He said that we don't go to heaven, we become heaven. My greatest fear is a sudden and unprovided departure, so that I didn't get a chance to tell someone that I loved, how much I loved, and how grateful I was, and that those that I refused to love, that I'm sorry that I didn't, and it was my loss, and will you forgive me? I hope that I have time to do that.
Since we're talking about your father and nonviolence, I wondered if you could share, since I never got to ask you this, anything about what you learned from him personally about nonviolence. How do we teach nonviolence and live nonviolence? And it seems to me sometimes your dad had it in his DNA to be gentle. For me, it's kind of a struggle. And I did a national convention on nonviolence a couple years ago. I brought Jim Lawson in, and I said, I want you to talk about Dr. King's nonviolence. And he goes, John doesn't know nonviolence. If Martin were here, he'd say nonviolence is power. We're not powerless. We have the power through nonviolence to change the world through love and truth. I'm thinking of that time you were marching with your father and you held his hand. I read in a book, and you felt the peace that he knew. Can you tell me what you learned from your dad about nonviolence?
Well, I think, first of all, what was learned was this has to be a way of life, a commitment. You can't practice it one day, except for that one time where he became angry with us because we poured water in his ear.
Meaning his kids, his children. Yeah.
And so he was, that's the only time I really ever saw him angry. He didn't quite whip us, but he was on the way.
What you have to elongate. I never heard that story.
Neither did I. And
you got to tell us.
You have to tell us that, because you're saying you never saw him angry.
No,
Otherwise,
I never remember seeing him angry. I always saw him. He was always very measured and disciplined, and I think that's what, in relationship to nonviolence, it has to be a discipline, because we are human beings. We're going to be upset. We're going to be angry, and as I said, now he was asleep. And he was exhausted. And because our
So
experience
you
had
were
been-
violent.
Well, yeah, I guess in a way. We didn't see it that way at the time. But our experience was whenever Dad came home, his entire attention was devoted toward fulfilling us as his children.
Yeah.
So it was like, I got to play with them. And this is looking back, thinking about it, because I'm gone all the time, and I don't have a large quantity of time. But the quality of time I want to use to fulfill my kids. So we wanted to play, and he was asleep. So somebody, it wasn't me, but somebody came up with the smart idea, let's pour water in Dad's ear. And then
Can you imagine?
that was not a good experience. It was frightening because, of course, we did that and ran, and he ran after us.
Did he catch you?
Didn't whoop us. He didn't catch us that day. I qualified that day.
But the rest of the time he was
No, he was
gentle and
he was always measured and always the same kind of love that he provided for us as a father, although it was a father-son or father-daughter relationship, he provided to everyone.
just that's the one time in your 11 years you saw him get even like upset. He was gentle, nonviolent.
Yes.
He was practicing what he preached.
Right.
And I think that's what the movement needs today. We all have to reach Dr. King's level of nonviolence.
I think, yes, ideally. But I also think there's a practical and real side of human beings. And it doesn't mean we can't get there. We have to always aspire. Just like, we talk about a perfect union. Well, we're never going to be perfect, but we can always aspire to that.
Daymond, so many people shared with us how excited they were the opportunity to hear from you, partially because you've inspired so many people who want to follow in your footsteps. Now, one thing I don't know if everyone always realizes was your journey wasn't linear, wasn't always easy. And one thing I love how you've been relating to people by being very open about how when you were younger, you had dyslexia, school was not an easy pathway, it was a bit of an unconventional journey in high school. Can you take us back to that so that people see today this billion-dollar success, but they don't always understand the origin story?
I mean, the origin is, I think it's the American dream. I think that it is, I was less fortunate than many, and I was way more fortunate than most of the people on the planet. I had a house, and I had clean drinking water, right? So, and I had access to food and electricity. But, we only know what we come from. I came from, a place that was riddled, like most of the, American communities, riddled with crack, and most of my friends became drug dealers. I decided that's not a path that I wanted, but I was dyslexic. 8 of the 12 sharks are actually dyslexic. And I had a challenge. Yeah, I had a challenge.
I almost want people to share that on social media for any of the families.
Well, that's
out
why
there.
you said.
I love it.
Richard
Thank you.
Branson's dyslexic, Barbara's
Yeah.
dyslexic, Kevin's dyslexic. I believe Rohan's dyslexic, and because I'm dyslexic, I've got the other 3. So, so I didn't do well in school. Like I left back in the 7th grade. I didn't go to college, but I applied myself and started working. But I did realize I was hanging out as well because I grew up in Hollis, Queens, and almost majority of, at that time, a lot of the famous rappers came from there. LL Cool J, Salt and Pepper, Tribe Called Quest, and all that. I was on all these big tours since I was 14 years old. I became too cool for school. But then I turned around and I was laughing at the kids who were going to college in school. I laughed at all the band geeks, as they call it, and the nerds. Well, those band geeks became people like Dr. Dre and Timbaland, right, and Pharrell, and the nerds became Zuckerberg and Bezos. I remember I was working at Red Lobster right around 21 years old, and all those kids I was laughing at. Not that I knew Zuckerberg and those people, I'm just using an example. I remember all those kids that I laughed at that were going to college, investing in their future. Well, they were coming back now, and I was in Red Lobster serving them shrimp. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I'm the idiot. And I started to double down and try to, get any form of education I could. And being dyslexic was challenging, but I would read a book a week. I would find mentors. I would go and apply and do a lot of different things. I was reading the sales sheets at Red Lobster, finding out how this large corporation was making money. Well, they needed help back a year ago, but they were making money back then. And then I started to invest in things I love to do, which was this fashion. And I used what I call the power of broke. I realized that, 65% of a lot of winners and athletes are broke 3 years after leaving the league because they don't know how to use the tool of money. and another 60 or 70% of Forbes' wealthiest 1,000 people are self-made men and women. That's like the men and women in this room and listening to this podcast. So obviously, money is just a tool. And I started to use what was around me as normal entrepreneurs. Well, I knew rappers. Why don't you wear that? Well, I knew this. Why don't you do that? And it slowly grew. I had a lot of challenges. I started FUBU in '89. I closed it 3 times from '89 to '92 because I ran out of money. I found my beautiful 3 partners who believed in me after that. Now, there were 10 people who believed in me, but most of them didn't stay around. It was those 3 that believed in me. And then by 1998, I was doing $350 million a year. Now, that's a long story. I started in '89. In 1998, I started to get public recognition after failing 3 times. But that's the American dream. That's why when we look at people like me and all of us on Shark Tank, we all went through that process.
Have you failed since then?
I failed. I try to fail every day. When I talk to my daughter at night, when we go to bed, when she goes to bed, she's 8 years old, I tell her how Daddy failed that day and how Daddy succeeded. And I ask her how will she fail and how did she fail that day. They may be, I planned on doing this and I didn't get to this and I was late for a meeting, and you should never be late, because when you're late, you make the other person feel like they're not of value. And whatever the case is, so she gets used to understanding that failure is a part of the process and that it comes along with successes.
Sanjay, your work has touched countless people. Millions are inspired by your message. But I've heard you say when we had dinner that at the heart of all you do and the heart of your purpose is your 3 daughters. So how has being a dad affected how you think of purpose and legacy?
Not only a dad, but a girl dad.
Teenage girl dad.
It does make him reach out to boys a little bit, like, "Hey guys, what you doing?"
No, it's a great question, and then again, I'll just say this is what's so nice about these conversations, because I think life moves so fast. You don't often reflect on that sort of thing. It's just my life. I'm a teenage girl dad, and so the idea of how it changed me, I don't know what to compare it to. I don't know what I would have been like had I not done this. But I will say this: it feels very natural. I feel like there's times when I've said to Rebecca, I feel like I manifested my destiny in a way, that this was how it was supposed to unfold. So that's a good feeling, as opposed to feeling out of sorts or like something doesn't work or belong. I'll be honest. I think a lot of people think about their legacy, and I think that's important to the extent that it drives them to do good things in the world. But to think about yourself in retrospect, generations down the line, who knows? We live in a really flimsy world, and people's attitudes and belief systems and all these things change. So all that to say, we don't think about legacy in a conventional sense that way, except when it comes to our girls. They are the legacy. That's it.
What do you love most being a girl dad? What gets you up in the morning having that wonderful title?
They challenge me, and they really.
Oh, tell us.
Well,
Come on.
I think when you're
we need to understand this.
When you're a neuroscientist, I think part of what drives you is that you're consistently trying to find logic in the world. And there are things that are just, they defy logic, and you have to get comfortable with that. You have to get comfortable with the uncertainty. So, the idea of walking down into the kitchen in the morning and never really knowing for sure what you're going to get, it's wonderful if you lean into it.
Yes.
If it scares you, then, you got to readjust, but you got to.
Mark got 2 daughters, so I think
I've got 2
asking.
daughters, yeah. I was asking about very personally here. And we've got one amazing daughter here among the King family as well.
Sanjay, on your podcast, Chasing Life, you've explored the effects of social media on kids, even going as far as interviewing your daughters, who you call the real experts. How do you and Rebecca help them navigate a healthy balance between social media and real-world connections?
I will tell you one thing that I found interesting, though, is that they did this camp over the summer where there was no phones allowed. And it was a couple weeks, right?
Yeah, they always did that every summer.
And they come back super happy. Super
Yes.
happy from this. And I made the observation that, hey, this thing that you are using all the time, you didn't use it at all, and you're super happy. And my youngest, who's, I think, a very wise child, she said to me, it's called social media. And I said, I get it. She goes, I was totally social. I had all these people my own age. I was with them all the time. I was interacting in a social way. That's what I'm really trying to do. But in the United States, many households have become more siloed off. And so having that type of village social interaction, all the kids playing together in the street, or in the playground, whatever, that you don't see that as much. So it has filled a gap for them. There's problems, and I think, the devices are designed to be addictive in a way, but it does at the same time serve a purpose that I think is very human, evolutionarily. Like, they want to be together. If they can't be together physically, then they want to be together virtually, digitally.
And that feels different to them, I think, than to us. I mean, since they were raised with it, and we're just like you all, like, we're trying to balance between the two, because just taking it away is not, they won't be prepared, they're not prepared for a digital world, and they are using it also sometimes in a way that is connection. And I do think for us, connection is all physical, but perhaps since our kids are being, they're nurtured in a digital world, part of their connection is social, like digitally.
And you'll notice a big difference when they start driving, because then they can go and be social, where that is such a huge difference in our society too. Like, it's when it becomes the parents' responsibility to get them here, get them there, they spend less time. We're controlling it too much. And so they spend less time, like I said, having those study groups or doing those things. And when they do have that autonomy to, like, go out, meet a friend for coffee and go over, history or something, they start doing it. And the phone and the social media becomes less and less and less.
I'm smiling at my husband across the table, because we're seeing that already, like literally
you do
with her
and
license.
Suddenly you're like, wow, well, I mean, because we have all this technology that tells us how much time our kids are on social media. And we look at our daughter who's in college, and now she's living with her sorority sisters, that kind of stuff, and she's rarely ever on it, and she used to be our biggest person on it. So it's a social thing for
I'll tell you 3 quick things that Rebecca came up with, as far as if people are thinking about social media for their kids. One is that we made an agreement that we actually could have access to their accounts. So kind of the ability to lurk. Now, we didn't really do it much, but they knew that we could. Number 2 was, and we every now and then we would peek in to see what was going on. Number 2 was that no friends online that you couldn't touch in the real world. I want to be able to touch that person physically, like, or is this somebody who's totally made up? Right. And the third thing, which Rebecca mentioned, is that your technology allows you to monitor screen time. So you can get indicators that there's too much screen time being used on Snapchat or Instagram, and it can even cut off after a certain amount of time. So, those 3 things, again, it's a brave new world for everybody when it comes to this, but I think they've worked well for our 3 teenage girls.
Yeah, we did have a cutoff at a certain time at night and turn back on at a certain time in the morning.
We do that,
Yeah, because sleep is really important.
Exactly.
And it is hard when they're up studying or need to get the, lost that paper or something that they want to reach out. I think technology and social media is not going to go away. It's learning how to make it work for you, and thinking about what is the main reason that it is in our lives, and then how do you work around that.
Now, Larry, our origin story is so important to all of us, and who raised us has a phenomenal impact, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, you grew up the middle child of 6 kids in California, but your family has roots in the Midwest.
Yes.
And so I'm really curious, and I'm sure our listeners are, is who would you consider the most influential person of your childhood?
Of course, my parents, very influential in different ways. My parents got divorced when I was young, but I was able to get different things from both parents sometimes in different ways. My mom went through a lot. She really dealt with a lot of emotional issues, but there was a strength about her and a resilience about her that I really admired, even going through it. And my dad was a person who, it seemed like he just kept his his own ideas about himself when he was out in the world. Like, the world didn't affect him. And he was a civil servant. He was a probation officer at a time, and it wasn't easy for black people, working those kinds of jobs. But he always had a sense of humor about it. And I always admired the way he treated people. I also grew up at a time when your neighborhood kind of raised you. Our next door neighbors were very important to raising us. We called them BB and Uncle Henry were their names. They were an older couple from Texas, had all that homespun, old school, like, knowledge and everything. Like, she made peach jam and canned it. It was that type of growing up. And we all had fruit trees in our backyards. But the last part of it was was so lucky I had influential teachers who, at certain points in my life, were just there at the right time. And there was a thread through some of my most important teachers. They always appreciated individuality, uniqueness. It's okay to be different, And one of the biggest ones of that, I'll say briefly, was my 7th grade teacher. He and his wife were from Peru. I went to Catholic school. They were the lay teachers there. And he saw that I was, like, making jokes and stuff, like, during school, me and my friends. And he came to me once and he said, "Okay, Larry, here's the thing. I'm going to make a deal with you. After lunch, there's like 15 minutes when I'm trying to get everybody's attention and all that stuff. You can have that as joke time, okay? And you could get up and do whatever you want in front of the class." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds fantastic." He says, "But in return, I don't want to hear a peep out of you for the rest of the day." And I'm like, "Done. That's a fantastic deal. Are you kidding me?" And he was so influential. In fact, I remember he gave us a math question that he said, "Nobody can figure this out. If you do, I'll cook you a steak dinner." Of course, my brain wouldn't stop. I figured it out. And sure enough, he and his wife invited me into their home, cooked me a steak dinner. I'll never forget that teacher. He was so influential in how he dealt with students and inspired us. He used to play the guitar every day in class. It was just great. Mr. and Mrs. Ribello. Yeah, they were awesome. Just the best teachers ever. So teachers, family, and neighbors.
And neighbors. And now, Lauren, how did you see the values your dad grew up with influence the way that he parented you and your brother?
It's so interesting when he was saying teachers and family. I was like, that is such a theme in my life. So many people, first of all, many people in my family are teachers on both sides. And I'm an actor, but my day job is teaching Mandarin to kids. And I also have so many teachers that have influenced me. Yeah, the sidebar. We can come back to that.
That was, am I the only one going to say that out loud? Did I miss something there?
And a quick dad flex. She also teaches French. That's just a quick dad flex.
Occasionally. Okay. But I have so many teachers that have influenced me as well. And part of what inspired me to become a teacher was knowing how much your life can change from one good teacher who sees you and values you and helps nudge you along your path. Then also the importance of family, especially since 2020. Like, we've all just been really clinging on to our family the past 5 years, and we've lost a lot of family members, but it has really brought all of us closer, and we've just really been finding as many ways as possible to just like support each other and all of that throughout this time. So yeah, those two, you happen to mention those two values, and I think those are big themes in my life.
The apple didn't fall far from the tree.
So Lauren, your dad's known for certainly a sharp humor and ability to challenge perspectives through comedy. He certainly is a big deal in Hollywood. But what's something you and your brother maybe tease him about that reminds you that he's just dad?
It's so funny because I was thinking about this and I was like, what don't we tease him about? But also, what doesn't he tease us about? It's a lot of mutual teasing in our household. There's just always this back and forth of silliness and goofiness. And I think one thing that, and feel free if you think of anything, Dad, but a lot of times if he does a joke that I feel like goes a little too far, I'll give him 2 thumbs down. And he's always like, whoa, oh no, 2 thumbs down. And he'll probably use it anyway, but that's a fun little thing that I do. But I don't know. Can you think of anything to add?
No, I was going to mention that. Lauren is great because I can see how far I'm being provocative. Like the thumbs up or thumbs downs. You know, when I get 2 thumbs down, I'm like, oh, I'm touching a nerve here. Oh.
So, Lauren, you know, you've watched your dad navigate Hollywood and said he taught you a lot about resilience. What is one of the most important pieces of advice that he's given you in terms of navigating through?
I think this just for life, not even just for, you know, being in show business, but he always said to John and I, you don't have to be the best, you have to be your best. And that stuck with me because I am a recovering perfectionist. And, you know, like, just knowing that it wasn't, and that kind of takes off the energy of competition as well, of having to beat other people out for something. But just focusing on living up to your potential and shining your light as opposed to trying to dim someone else's so that you can get to the top. I mean, that applies to just everything ever in life, but certainly in show business. And I've really come to understand that more the past couple years that I've been here in New York, and finding my community here and my friends, and we're all just constantly lifting each other up because that's the only way to, you know, that's the only way to live. You can't be always trying to push other people down.
Thanks for joining us for this best of episode of My Legacy. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode.